Thank you, Mrs. Gentle, for your thoughtful words. I would like to now introduce Mr. Gal Strasberg, past Sandgate District State High School student, Ducks for the School, OP1 student, as guest speaker.
Good morning, class of 2015. It's very interesting to be back here. It's been 6 years since I've given a speech up on this stage. And not being in high school anymore, I don't have to say what's obliged of me. I don't any longer have to say what's expected to me. So I'm not going to give you a formal speech. I'm going to do something a little bit more interesting. I'm going to take you on a journey. My hope is that I can challenge you to think, and that hopefully I can lead you towards a process of self-actualisation. If there's only one thing that I'd add to what Mrs. Gentle said, I think an important value for humanity is to be true to yourself, and I hope that my talk can inspire you in that way. So up here I've got a quote which I really like, and it goes like this: "The purpose of reaching the end is to arrive back to the start and finally understand it." I finished school in 2009, and since then I've had a lot of time to reflect. I've had a lot of time to think about what I've done with my life, the decisions I've made, and the relationships I share with other people. And this is a picture of me working in my mother and father's cafe back in 2007 in Sandgate. So I think there's no better place to begin our journey. So the year is 2007. I'm serving pancakes to some patrons at my mother and father's cafe in Sandgate. It's the beginning of an 8-hour shift, during which I'll be serving customers with a feigned smile, alongside a grumpy chef, watching endless piles of dishes and trying to remember long orders from customers. By the close of business, as I methodically pack the chairs and tables outside and bring them into the shop, I'm exhausted. But I've been doing this for 3 years now, and I'm strangely used to the familiar monotony of this routine, this ritual. I've grown accustomed to the idea that this represented my future. I didn't have to try too hard at school. I didn't have to consider other options. I could work alongside my mother and father until the year 2100, serving pancakes and cooking myself a schnitzel at the end of every shift. But then, one Saturday night, as I pack up the chairs and tables outside, a paralyzing panic sets in. I'm frozen in a whimsical epiphany. To my consternation, I think to myself, I'm on grade 10 holidays now. I'm about to head into grade 11. I have to do something with my life. I'm a terrible student, and if I don't do something now, it'll be too late. So supposedly I've got all of this potential, and I put potential in quotations marks, because it's not just about potential, it's about what you do with it. And I remember many, many times at parent-teacher interviews, I wasn't a particularly good student, I was rude, I was obnoxious, and I wasn't the most pleasant person to teach. But one thing that myself and my parents remember with vivid clarity is that the teachers would always say, he has lots of potential. So the question, ladies and gentlemen, is what the hell do I do now? So I was 15, and the subjects I chose to study for the next 2 years were Maths B, Maths C, Physics, Chemistry, Biology, and English Extension, colloquially known as the Suicide Six. And to be honest with you, I was so unprepared that suicide actually seemed like a pretty good option at this point. So to give you just an idea of where I was, I couldn't add fractions. I didn't understand algebra. The only thing that I really had a decent grasp of was the English language. I recall towards the end of grade 10, I was coming home from school. I just had some maths homework, and I'm asking my mother and father for some help with the equation a plus 4 equals 7. So for 2 hours, they sat down with me, they patiently tried to explain, but it just didn't sink in. And I know this must seem really bizarre and astonishing to you. Here's the school ducks, OP1, coming up and telling you that at the end of grade 10, he didn't understand algebra. He couldn't do the equation, a plus 4 equals 7. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a true story as much as I wish that it wasn't. I was so lazy, so disinterested throughout much of my schooling that basic things like these, basic education, which is essential for further learning, I had an enormous deficit in. And I knew that at this point, if I didn't do something, if I didn't try really hard to better myself, serving pancakes with mum and dad until the year 2100, it wouldn't just be an option, it'd very likely be my only option. So at this stage, I virtually knew nothing, but there was one thing that I knew really, really well, and that was computers. Now, I couldn't afford expensive private tuition or expensive textbooks, so YouTube and occasional luck at the op shop became my education, and I'd watch YouTube videos covering maths, physics, biology. This really became my education. And so, I literally had to get up to speed with 2 years of content in a month before I start grade 11. So over a month, for about 8 hours each day, I just sat down in front of these YouTube videos and I started with the basics. Adding fractions, basic algebra and physics, basic biology like the structure and function of cells and forms of life, plants, animals and fungus. I kept persevering and I continued this style of education throughout grade 11, and halfway through grade 11 I was already covering grade 12 maths. The icing on the cake with regards to my style of study was that I ended up topping my subjects in grade 11. At this point I realised I wasn't stupid, I wasn't a no-hoper, as I would have had myself believe and as others had often told me. I was someone that could achieve something if he actually tried, if he had the determination, if he had the passion to just apply himself. But more importantly than all this, I became someone that wanted to learn. In fact, I became someone that loved learning. I had a thirst for learning that just couldn't be quenched. And one thing that I became really passionate about over this time was medicine, physiology, diseases, questions like why do we get sick? Why do we get old? And is there anything that we can do about this? The idea that I could serve the community as a doctor and help others, it wasn't just something that I wanted to do because I was interested in diseases and how we could treat them. It was something that I wanted to do because I wanted to serve the community and I wanted to give back and do something that I was genuinely passionate about. I was on a mission. I had to do this. Now, I'm going to tell you something that not many people know except for my mother and father and obviously my closest friends. When I was 3 years old, I was given the diagnosis of ADHD, Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. Not just ADHD, but severe ADHD. I was part of a medical study in Sydney, New South Wales as one of the worst cases of ADHD that they had ever seen. And I'm talking the full works. I had a functional MRI study, I had psychologists come and see me, psychiatrists, and they said, this guy is bad. Now, for a lot of my schooling, I genuinely believed this diagnosis. I believed that I could never focus, I believed that I could never concentrate, and sadly I believed that I could never learn. Now, one thing that I remember quite clearly, even though I was quite young at the time, is the doctor at the time, he told my mother and father, your son will never finish high school, don't bother pushing him any further. Now, the really sad thing about this whole story is that it nearly came true. I was so frighteningly close to living out a reality that someone handed to me, rather than having the leadership and the courage within myself to craft my own reality and lead my own path in life. Over those Year 10 holidays, I simply made the decision to believe otherwise, to not believe what I'd been told, but to go with my gut feeling, my instinct, to be true to myself. With every facet of my constitution, I decided that I was not a diagnosis. I am not Gull with ADHD. I am just Gull, and if Gull tries to do something, Gull can do it. Now, at first it was incredibly difficult. I couldn't sit down for more than 15 minutes at a time and study. But I didn't give up, and that's the point. I couldn't give up. And now, as I stand before you today, it sort of hits me. How dare a doctor or anyone else tell me that I couldn't finish high school, that I couldn't do what I wanted to do, that I shouldn't bother applying myself in order to achieve my goals. Now, on the topic of leadership, let's just take a moment to consider how many people, like myself, may not have reached their full potential. How many people didn't demonstrate any sort of leadership and just accepted a reality that was handed to them, a reality that they were told, rather than questioning and developing a reality that was true to themselves through inquiry, through questioning. Now, in grade 12, I set myself the goal of becoming school dux and entering medical school. It meant a great deal to me. And for me, it wasn't about impressing anyone. I didn't want to impress my teachers or my classmates. It was more about proving to myself that I could actually achieve something big if I applied myself. I think as I speak to grade 12 students, it's important to be real and to tell you the truth. I don't want to make out like this was an easy process, because it was exactly the opposite. I studied incredibly hard. It was really exhausting. It was stressful, and oftentimes I'd come close to just giving up. But I remembered back to those days in grade 10, the vivid clarity of that paralysing panic and the blessing of that whimsical epiphany. I finally realised around this time that the only thing that stood between me and my goals was me. In the end, I did end up becoming a school dux. I did top my subject, and the icing on the cake, of course, was achieving an OP1. Now, being here to speak with you today, it's incredibly important to me, because none of this would have been possible without the incredible teachers and staff at Sandgate High. And this isn't something that I'm saying because it's expected to me. I'm not saying it because I'm obliged to talk up the school. I'm saying this because I genuinely believe it. And those who know me know that I always speak my mind. I'm telling you that Sandgate helped me because at the end of grade 10, I was virtually at a grade 8 level. I'm now 6 months away from completing a medical degree at 22 and becoming a doctor. I finished an accelerated Dean Scholars Bachelor of Science at QUT at age 19. I've delivered talks at national medical conferences and published scientific papers. And Lord be my witness, I didn't need a private school to do it. Now, what made this all possible is that Sandgate gave me a chance. When they saw how much I wanted this, they did everything, and I mean everything that they could to help. The teachers and staff didn't have to give me extra reading materials and stay behind hours after they clocked off work and go through them with me. They didn't have to scrutinise infinite drafts of my assignments or put up with my neuroticism during grade 12. But they did, and they did it happily. Ultimately, their desire for my success was just as strong as mine, oftentimes stronger. And this is what defines my experience at Sandgate. A community of passionate, genuinely caring people that saw past my flaws and helped me, even when I was incredibly stressed, rude, obnoxious, and pushy towards them. So it isn't just about Sandgate having demonstrated professionalism and doing their job. It was about seeing the potential in someone that had given up on themselves and day in, day out, for 2 years, setting them on a trajectory, a path of self-actualisation so that they could see their potential, so that they could finally understand who they were. Now, as you've probably realised by now, I'm not your typical school dux success story, straight A's throughout grade 8 to 12. But that, in essence, is the point of this story. You don't have to be that person. We're all very different and unique, and on that note, life never takes a linear path. Life is an asymptotic, gyrating snake. It can change direction at any second. Now, Mrs. Gentle mentioned important things earlier about leadership, about serving the community. Now, something which I've encountered as a medical student, working in a hospital, working in GP community centres, is the often stigmatised mental illness. Now, there are many of us that suffer from depression, anxiety, bipolar, and other psychiatric diagnoses, but we're too ashamed to tell others. It's a faux pas to tell your friends or family or to speak about it. So, during my time in medical school, I had a lot of friends that often dropped out because they were too scared to seek help at the right time. I've had friends that have committed suicide because their families weren't accepting or they couldn't tell their friends. So I decided that I wanted to do something about this. I wanted to help people. I didn't want to be a part of a society where things like these are stigmatized and people end their life over something for which they can seek help. So my father being a photographer, I decided that I wanted to do something different. So there's a number of organisations in Queensland. There's a large gay community in Queensland that is often stigmatised themselves and suffer from mental illness. So I decided that I would work alongside my father and people with mental illness to develop a fundraising calendar. So with a very camp attitude, you'd have Miss January, Miss February dressed up in drag, and it'll be something different, something to raise awareness. And this is just one example of something small, a small symbolic gesture, but in the scheme of things, it represents a greater change. Now, at this juncture, I'd like to bust open some myths that grade 12 students and their families frequently worry about with regards to their student success. Myth number 1, quote, "You need to go to a good private school to succeed in grade 12. And I don't know if you guys can read that, but that was a show, a very popular one which the students will probably know about private schools. And here's a picture of a girl from a private school, and it reads as follows. "I want to go to Africa and just hang out with starving people and take photos of me with them." Ladies and gentlemen, that is not leadership and that is not courage. That is having too much money and not knowing what to do with it, and that is not the essence of what it means to be a student and to be a member of the community and to be a successful functioning member of society. Unfortunately, you've ever seen who's 2 years behind in schooling can make it. I honestly believe that anyone can. In fact, I'm sure. So briefly and in closing, where am I now? So between 2010 and 11, after finishing high school, I completed a Dean's Scholar Accelerated Bachelor of Science at QUT. During this time, I also published a paper in the area of experimental eye research. When this chapter of my life came to a close, I began studying at Deakin Medical School in Victoria. If all goes to plan, I will be Deakin Medical School youngest ever medical graduate. My plan after I finish medical school in another 6 months is to return to Queensland, complete my internship, and give back to the community that gave me a chance, to give back to the people that believed in me, and to do my job. During medical school, I've also been involved in a number of organisations that are looking at things a little bit differently in terms of medicine, medical technology, and the future. I've been involved with an organisation called A5M, also known as the Australian College of Anti-Aging and Aesthetic Medicine. And there's a huge push at the moment. There's a lot of research going into things like understanding what it is that makes our brains tick. Things like neuroplasticity. Can we get smarter? Just how much smarter? Things like, why do we get old? Can we stop that? Should we stop that? But more importantly, things like personalised genetic medicine. Tailoring medical care to you so that you achieve the best outcomes that you can and have the best quality of life that you deserve. Now, before I head back to the hospital this afternoon, I'd like to leave you with one last important thought. 2 nights ago, I was doing a 4 p.m. till midnight shift at the emergency department at Geelong Hospital. It was a very busy night, and towards the end of my shift, I took a history from and examined a very elderly patient in his mid-90s, and we got to talking about his incredible life, his amazing family. And he said to me this, "Gull, I know you might not understand this, but when you get to my age, you take a lot of time to reflect. You look back on your past, the decisions you've made, your family. And you begin to think, did I make the right choice? Have I really lived the life that I wanted to live? And he said this to me, Gull, if I have one regret in life, it's this. I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life that other people expected of me. Thank you.